Skip Bayless here. I want to tell you about my podcast, The Skip Bayless Show. On this show, my show, I go deeper than I ever have, taking you behind the scenes of some of the biggest moments in sports, behind the headlines, even peeling back the curtain on my own personal life. I like to call it the undisputed. Instead of debating my partner Shannon Sharp, I'll tell you stories you've never heard before and let you in on what makes me, me. Make sure you listen to The Skip Bayless Show on your favorite podcast app.
As if the McCrispy couldn't get any better, Bacon and Ranch just entered the chat. The Bacon Ranch McCrispy, available at participating McDonald's for a limited time. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
The Purple Mafia, with your host, Paladino Joey.
Well, we'll see. The doctors would disagree, but what do they know?
So let's just say that you'll pay me because it's in your interest to pay me.
Is it worth it? I mean, you've won. Do you want to wipe everybody out?
I don't feel I have to wipe everybody out, Tom. Just my enemies. That's all. My father taught me many things. He taught me, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer.
These are wonderful things that we've achieved, and there's no limit to where we can go from here.
Welcome to the family once again here on Purple Mafia. Today is Monday, June 15th in the year of our Lord 2009. Today it is episode number 31 of Purple Mafia, Minnesota Vikings podcast. I thank each and every one of you always for downloading and listening to this show, as we're available on thesportstuff.com and on iTunes. Thank you always for joining this hit show here in the Twin Cities. Well, we have a lot to talk about today. We're going to talk about Brett Favre. I know a lot of you out there might be getting a little bit sick of this story. So today's show won't be ultra long, and it won't only focus on Brett Favre. We're going to talk a little bit about Antoine Winfield as well. So that is the case today. Brett Favre and Antoine Winfield. The first segment here, of course, is the introduction, but then also we go into Brett Favre in the second segment, and we're going to talk a little Antoine Winfield in the third. But first and foremost, as I mentioned, Purple Mafia is available on thesportstuff.com. We would like you to please sign up and join the family of thesportstuff.com. The message boards, we would like you to sign up. It is 100% free and 100% fun. As mentioned, there is a button in the upper right-hand corner on the front page of the website. It says TSS Boards. Simply click on that, and that is how you will be able to be prompted to sign up. As mentioned, it is free, and there's all kinds of things you can talk about. We could really use more and more Minnesota Viking fans on those boards. It would be very, very helpful. Absolutely. So with that, we are going to take our first break, and we will get into the Brett Favre talk right after this. Here on thesportstuff.com, we're bursting in blue with Timberwolves Explosion. Timberwolves fans, your show has arrived at last as we bring in a new era with Al Jefferson, Kevin Love, and Mike Miller. We're available on thesportstuff.com and also available on iTunes. Download and listen to in-depth and detailed coverage of your favorite team. Show your true blue and join this explosion of Timberwolves basketball. And we are back here on Purple Mafia, episode number 31, which is a reminder for iPod users. Do check out Timberwolves Explosion, Minnesota Timberwolves podcast on thesportstuff.com, on iTunes, and also on timberwolvespress.com. do indeed check that out. There will be a new show up soon where we will talk about the NBA draft before the draft, and I'm sure, obviously we'll have one post-draft at some point where I hopefully will have Alec Alshimki join me for that one. He, of course, the webmaster of Timberwolves Press. I'd also like to get Dylan Richardson on this show, Purple Mafia. Of course, he is the executive producer of thesportstuff.com and, of course, also the host of NFL East to West, the Sports Stuff Zone NFL East to West podcast. Do check that out on thesportstuff.com and iTunes as well. Well, folks, a lot of the stars are aligning for Brett Favre to join this football team. If his arm is healthy. That's really what it's come to, as long as his arm is healthy. I mean, there's been so much back and forth. I've wanted to do a show for quite a while. My schedule keeps getting in the way, but also the other thing is, it's tough to really come out and do a show when there's no real official hard news or hard evidence to certain things, and stuff keeps getting reported and then retorted, you know? It keeps getting shot down almost immediately after stuff gets reported. So it's like, okay, don't know really what to say, you know? I mean, there was a talk last week that Brett Favre had been given a deadline from Coach Brad Childress. Next thing you know, Brad Childress calls into the Power Trip, which is the morning show on KFAN. Mike Morris, former long snapper of the Minnesota Vikings, is the host of that show. Fairly entertaining bit. Brad Childress does a Flip Saunders and calls into the show out of nowhere. No, you know, I mean, it's like, wow, this guy's actually got a personality after all, doesn't he? No, and the guy opened a vein, said there is absolutely no truth to any of this talk. I don't know where they're getting this information. It's a lot of BS, basically, is what Brett Childress said. Yeah, I mean, a lot of us were wondering, why the heck would you give a man a deadline right after, as now I'm going to get into this, of course, a lot of you already know this, but I still got to talk about it, right after Brett Favre had officially had surgery. I mean, not too long, Brett Favre indeed did opt to have surgery on that biceps tendon, so it has been cut off. There was so many different rumors about what Brett Favre was going to do, mainly that he didn't want to deal with surgery. He'd rather do workouts that were done by a certain doctor, well-known doctor, and the injury would be healed that way. It would just kind of basically come off, and Dr. Andrews, that is, and in the end, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, Brett Favre had surgery 2 weeks ago. It was just kind of a secret, you know. It's like a Bilderberg meeting, you know. They got to hide it. It's a secret meeting, just like Hillary and Obama disappearing for their Bilderberg meeting, and yeah, I don't know if they'll be too happy that I mentioned that, but I don't care. But that's basically what it was. He just disappeared. No information for 2 weeks. Then that comes out. And then it's like, yeah, the guy can't really throw the ball because his arm is way, way too sore. So now Brad Childress gives Brett Favre a deadline? The Mr. I don't want to show up for training camp because I've been in the league for 18 years. Why would I show up for training camp? I don't need to. Or I mean, not training camp. Excuse me. My bad. OTAs. Why would I show up to OTAs when I'm a veteran and I proved last year that it didn't really matter? Then again, maybe it did. But, you know, why would you give him a deadline? That would basically kill the whole possibility of Brett Favre ever joining this team. Now, I know some of you out there, including Darren from thesportstuff.com, also known as Daz, you know, who does not want Brett Favre to join this team. And, of course, that's his opinion, and he's more than welcome to it. I personally prefer to have Brett Favre a part of this team, because I think he gives the Minnesota Vikings by far the strongest opportunity to make a run, not only in the regular season, but in the postseason. As last year, the Vikings made the postseason with Tavares Jackson and Gus Frerotte, and yeah, Tavares Jackson starting at quarterback against Philadelphia. To me, I had no faith in that, and I would have a lot more faith with a guy like Brett Favre. Now, but yeah, as I mentioned, I was a bit shocked that why would the hell would Brad Childress do that and just kill any possibility of getting Brett Favre after all we've been through already. And, Brad Childress then calls up and says it's all just a bunch of BS. So there we go. We're back to that point now. Real quick before I get into the next saga in this story, which is one where that tells you the stars are really aligning for Brett Favre to come here. Daz's comment, Darren, moderator of the Dallas Mavericks and Minnesota Vikings boards on the sportstuff.com. So if you do join these boards and start talking on the Vikings message board on here, you will get to know Daz. He is a giant Viking fan. His comment, stop going for this washed up quarterback. His time in the NFL as a good quarterback is over. He is just too old. If Childress is set on making Tavares or Rosenfels his starting quarterback, he needs to start getting them ready for the job. This Favre talk is getting old. Big deal Green Bay bleeped up. Big deal Green Bay bleeped you, so you want to play for the Vikings so you can get revenge. Well, I have news for Favre. The majority of Viking fans do not want to see this B word in purple and gold. My response to this is, Daz, you have the right to your own opinion, and I definitely understand why anybody would be bored with the story because it's frustrating. It's extremely frustrating. It's a bunch of back and forth. We all want this to end one way or the other, right? But to say the majority of Viking fans don't want Brett Favre on this team, I don't know about that. I can't say I agree with that statement. Nothing against anybody here. I'm not trying to show anybody up or talk down to anybody. I just can't say I agree with that statement. I believe if there was a vote that more than 50% would prefer Brett Favre as the quarterback over Tavares or Sage. Now, I also would say that over 50% would prefer Sage over Tavares because he is an alternative to Tavares Jackson, who has frustrated all of us the last 2 years, or at least the majority of us. And Sage Rosenfels has had at least one fairly good season 2 years ago. Last year, a lot more inconsistency, a lot more interceptions. So that's the deal with that, I guess, right now. The opinions of Brett Favre on this team, I really do believe more than half of the Minnesota Viking fans would prefer Brett Favre on this team because he gives us a legitimate chance to make a playoff run despite his age and despite his, his back and forth attitude of everything. I mean, the thing is, though, to be honest, is it really back and forth? It's almost more of just a bunch of reporting back and forth. It's more the media is creating the back and forth, you could say, at this point in time. Because Favre, well, he retired and unretired, kind of, sort of, and that's really where the back and forth is. At this point in time, it's all a matter of is his arm healthy. That's not necessarily Favre's fault if his arm is healthy or not at this point in time. So, it's a complicated, strange deal. I don't blame anybody for getting a little tired of it and wanting a resolution. So I guess I'll just leave it at that before I twist myself around a little too much here and drive all of you even more crazy at this point in time. Now the other part in this the more interesting part in this story that makes you also believe that things are definitely heading towards Brett Favre being the quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings this year is on June 9th, the Associated Press, ultimately got to the Pioneer Press, Star Tribune, and all that good stuff, is that Brett Favre's family and friends have booked they've booked rooms for the Viking game, booked hotel rooms for the Minnesota Vikings at Green Bay game later this year in November. So that does tell you something's going on. I mean, that absolutely tells you that Brett Favre more than likely is going to play for this team one way or another at this point in time, because why would they do this? This is his family and friends. These people have a pretty good idea what Brett Favre is going to do at this point in time and where his heart is at this point in time. I mean, you got to think they have a pretty good idea. So, again, I'm going to say this is a 60-40 chance Brett Favre is the quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings. At one point I said 40%. I'm increasing it to 60. And there's always a chance he'll just come out and say the heck with it. I mean, tonight, shucks, he's meeting with Joe Buck tonight, quite possibly right now as we speak. I just don't have HBO because can't afford it. Sorry, that's a more expensive package for cable TV. Who knows what's going to take place at this point in time other than the stars continue to slowly align towards him playing for the Minnesota Vikings this year. The Packers cannot hold him hostage this time around. So we're just going to have to wait and see with that. I do support Brett Favre as the starting quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings, so I apologize to those of you out there that may not want this former Packer quarterback as your quarterback. I do at this point in time. I want to win, and that's where I stand at this point in time. I think he gives us the best chance to do that. So that is the current update for Brett Favre at this point in time. Sorry that I'm talking about the same story that might be annoying you out there, but it's the number one thing to talk about for Viking fans at this point in time. So with no further ado, we're going to take another quick break and talk a little Antoine Winfield. Here on thesportstuff.com, we're toughing up on Brave the Wild with Palladino. Join me, Palladino, as we brave the Minnesota Wild Hockey Club on our way to the playoffs. We're available on thesportstuff.com and iTunes. The boogeyman Derek Bugard says you'd better listen or he just might drop the gloves. Call up your courage and brave the wild with your buddy, Palladino Joey. And we are back here once again on Purple Mafia, episode number 31. A reminder for iPod users, do check out Brave the Wild, Minnesota Wild Hockey Podcast on thesportstuff.com and iTunes, and also minnesota.nhlfansite.com, minnesota.nhlfansite.com for that, as well as I mentioned, sportstuff.com. The Wild hired a new coach, so expect a new show pretty soon. Todd Richards, the new Minnesota Wild coach. So some of you may be hearing that for the first time, maybe, if you've been in a cave the last couple hours or don't really keep up too much of the Wild. There's your news. All right, well, Antoine Winfield has been staying away from the OTAs as well, so not just Brett Favre not showing up, even though he's not a Viking yet. Antoine Winfield not been showing up for OTAs. So this is definitely getting interesting. Childress wants Winfield here. Winfield has not been showing up. So that has definitely been a interesting situation. Antoine Winfield's quote to the Pioneer Press, "I want to retire a Viking." So that, of course, good news for Viking fans, especially, people like me who absolutely love Antoine Winfield, and he was the defensive MVP for the Minnesota Vikings last year. You could argue either him, Jared Allen, or Kevin Williams. All three of them were just phenomenal for the Vikings last season. Could have been E.J. Henderson had he not injured his toes, but that's the deal there. Antoine Winfield just phenomenal last year, finally making the Pro Bowl last season. But Antoine Winfield still not participating in the team's off-seasons practices this week, coinciding with stalled negotiations on a contract extension, so says the AP Sports writer Dave Campbell. This was a little while ago because, of course, I hadn't done the show, but this is where the news is coming from regarding Antoine Winfield. It is a contract negotiation situation. Winfield wants an extension and a decent one, and the Vikings have not been superly willing to offer him exactly what he wants at this point in time. Winfield, of course, had a career year last year, a Pro Bowl year, even though you could have said it could have been his fourth or fifth Pro Bowl. It was his first. The Vikings' defense in this situation, defense, whatever you want to say, is that Antoine Winfield is now, or at least will be, as of June 24th, the day before NBA draft night. Woohoo! He will be 32 years old already. Antoine Winfield, 32. And obviously the talk across the NFL, usually with players that, get into their 30s, they start to slow down a bit, and of course injuries can definitely start to take their toll. We saw that happen to Antoine Winfield in 2007. Luckily, though, other than that, he played all 16 games last year and all 16 games in 2006. Winfield has been a fairly durable guy other than 2007, at least for the Minnesota Vikings. He's obviously not a very big guy either, only 5'9", 180. Pretty small individual, but this guy can hit like anybody's business, or nobody's business, excuse me. But it's definitely a shame to not have Winfield reporting to OTAs. Of course, as he said, he wants to retire Viking, but the Vikings, of course, apparently not budging in their contract negotiations. Neither side really budging on either side. This happened a year ago, not a year ago, 2 years ago. The same type of situation happened 2 years ago after that horrible 6-10 season for the Minnesota Vikings. And we saw what happened to Antoine Winfield. He had injury issues. He missed 6 games in 2007. So we got to hope and pray that Antoine Winfield doesn't make the same mistake, continue to miss all this practice, and then, all of a sudden he's more susceptible to injury, especially with his age. And then that'll really kill his chances of getting the type of contract extension he so desires. So it's just another one of those wait and see type of deals with the Minnesota Vikings. But two players, Brett Favre and Antoine Winfield, are really obviously major pieces, potentially major pieces. Favre obviously would give you your superstar quarterback if healthy, and of course Winfield the same deal, superstar cornerback. This is just a situation we hope to get resolved sooner rather than later, especially with Antoine Winfield, because we know what he can do, and we know that he is still young enough to be a Pro Bowl guy. We'll see on Favre. So really, that's pretty much all there is to talk about, other than talk about Loadholt being being a bookend for Bryant McKinney, Phil Loadholt. So you can have two gigantic guys who are about the same size. Loadholt a little more lanky, but overall the same height. It's very close in weight. Loadholt, as I mentioned, more lanky because he's a rookie. Hasn't really bulked up yet as much as a 7-year pro like Bryant McKinney. 7-year pro, like Bryant McKinney. And other than that, though, it's kind of a dig for news. It's pretty much about Brett Favre and Antoine Winfield right now, and hoping that Loadholt and Percy Harvin can come in and be the major pieces that they hopefully can be for the Minnesota Vikings, the offensive line and the stud receiver, who obviously is very dangerous after the catch and has glue hands, something the Vikings did not have on the roster last year. Bernard Berrien dropping lots of passes. Sidney Rice having a major sophomore slump. Bobby Wade is just too damn slow. So yeah, I know I'm kind of jumping around a little bit here, but that's pretty much what's going on right now with the Vikings. There isn't really much to talk about other than Favre and Winfield, and I did that today, and I hope you enjoyed episode number 31. I did enjoy it, and we will talk to you very soon. Hopefully some good news will break regarding Winfield or Favre in the not-too-distant future, and we will absolutely have episode number 32 at that time. Might even have 32 before that if some other stuff is coming out and I'm able to get the show done. So until then, we will be on the lookout. Take care.